Welcome to the Conference Board Book Discussion. I'm Lynn, a research associate in human capital, and I'm joined here in the studio by the author of the book, Shift into Thrive, 6 Strategies for Women to Unlock the Power of Resiliency, Lynn Schmidt. Lynn is a director of full-time job right now, is the director of global executive and leadership development at Micron. A sought-after presenter on various topics related to talent management, specifically coaching, resiliency, leadership development, and succession management. Received the Talent Leadership Award at the World HRD Conference for her contributions to the field of talent development. Received a PhD in human and organizational systems from Fielding Graduate University, and as of last week has a book that's the #1 release on Amazon in the category of business, health, and stress. Congratulations and welcome, Lynn.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great. Before we get into the discussion, a couple of guidelines for our viewers to make the most of this webcast. Ask questions. Lynn and we want to make this session as interactive as possible. So ask questions. We'll be taking questions throughout. If you have a question, type the question in the chat box at the bottom left of the screen. You can also download this presentation via the file download pod in the bottom center of the screen. You may full screen the video or the PPT at any point by clicking the 4 arrows on the top right corner. You can share this website with your friends and colleagues and anybody you think may benefit from a topic or a content like this. It should be available on demand for our members and non-members. And lastly, we'd like to hear from you. We really appreciate if you can take a couple of minutes at the end of the program, not only just to tell us how we did, but also if you can give us suggestions about books and articles on what we can feature in our future book discussions. And lastly, the webcast also qualifies for CPE credit. Just type in your name and email address in the space provided. Click OK for 3 pop-ups that occur during the program at any point, which means you need to stay on for the entire webcast, and credit is available for live participation only. And with that, we move on to the discussion. Lynn, thank you again for joining.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
My question is, your background has been so much in talent management, HR, and human capital. And this book seems to be a little different from what you've done so far. How did that come about?
Actually, women's issues have always been a passion of mine, and it probably goes way back. When I was still in grade school, my father passed away. And my mother actually was a stay-at-home mom. And she didn't know how to drive. She hadn't worked. She couldn't pay bills. And so what I witnessed as a child was a real reinvention that she did for herself. So those things really stick with us. When I got into the workforce and I moved into leadership development, I started to see women go into top positions and not stay too long, come and go. And then I started my dissertation work, and I said, before I started it, I said, I'm not going to do a study on gender issues, and I'm not going to do a qualitative study. And what did I do? I did a study on gender issues, and it was qualitative. And it was about, it was giving women voice, which is what I have passion about. And it was about, I asked women whose career had derailed, I asked them why it happened. And so I got the perspectives of 23 women who had been forced out, fired, or asked to resign within 3 levels of the CEO, their perspective of why it happened. And then from then on, I've been very focused on women's issues. So it just was a matter of time before I moved into this realm with a book.
Okay. So I know I was reading the methodology, and there's extensive work that's gone behind this literature. But at the same time, when you mentioned that it is the #1 book on Amazon in the category of business, health, and stress, almost related categories, and I'm thinking, why do you think this book is in so much demand? Not that it is a great book, but what does it reflect of the times?
Absolutely, and actually, just to let you know, some more good news, we hit #1 in a second category, and that is work-life balance in business.
There you go.
Yeah, and so what does that reflect? Reflects, I think, a couple of things. If you think about history and when change has really been made for women, in the 60s, we had the Equal Pay Act, and then about 30 years later, we had all of the legal work done around discrimination. And so it's been another almost going on 30 years again. So if you look at the cycle and you think about Lean In, and you think about all the work that's being done right now to raise the issue about gender issues and gender inequality, that's what I think is what's making it a number one. And the fact that women are really looking for a resource like the book that gives them actions and activities that's really applicable and helps them thrive in the face of the challenges in the workplace.
I'm glad you mentioned, because I read the book and I realized that I need to go back to the book again, because it seemed more like a workbook. There are so many things, exercises and assessments that I could take, but it also, based on my conversation and even right now when we were chatting, there seems to be a passion for women that you have. There's a lot of work that you want to do around this. Why women? Why resiliency? And I know you mentioned a couple of challenges with women in the workplace, but what do you think, based on your research, is a number one concern for women?
I think the number one concern, and based upon our research and interviewing a lot of leaders and coaches and women, and also my dissertation, the number one concern is the multitude of issues that converge to hit a woman all at once. So and I think that goes back to the interest in the book. It isn't just one thing. It's societal demands, it's organizational pressures and policies and practice that don't meet our needs. It's other people's perceptions of a strong woman or a strong leader or an entrepreneur. And we could talk a lot about that, and how a woman who's assertive and a man who's assertive, the perception's not the same. You know, the perception is the woman's aggressive or bitchy. And so it's all of those things. And then there's the woman. Often we don't get the development opportunities we need to be successful, the profit and loss. Networking is not often our strength. So there are our own development needs that we have, but when you put all four of those together, typically that's hitting us all at once. So it's not one issue, it's the multitude of things that are converging that make it so difficult on the job for women and can cause us to decline or survive, but not thrive.
Okay. And this whole concept of, I know Sheryl Sandberg came up with this, the bossy. The moment the women become aggressive, they're immediately termed as a bossy. But a great point. And also the last time we talked about, you spoke about a resiliency building period that you had. Tell us a little more about that.
Absolutely. It was towards the end of 2015, I was impacted. I was laid off. And I started doing what I always do. You know, that's what we do, right? When something happens, we move into our typical mode. And I started interviewing for jobs. And I'd get off the phone, and they would be good jobs. And I'd get off the phone, and I would literally feel nauseous and sick to my stomach. And I was like, something's not right here. And I really didn't feel like I wanted to do this. And so I started working with a coach.
Did not want to go back?
Yeah, I did not want to go do what I normally had done. I didn't want to immediately roll into another job and do the same thing. So I was working with a coach, and she asked me, you know, what do you really want to do? And I said, I need to take some time off. And I'd like to give myself a sabbatical, and I'd like to go live in Europe for a year. And we were ready, my co-author and I were ready to start writing the book. And so that's what I did. And it was pretty scary.
I'm sure.
In that I got rid of almost 3/4 of my stuff. My brother took my dogs. I left the country with a suitcase. And it was also scary because the perception may be that in the United States, their employers may not be very open to employees or people who take this kind of sabbatical mid-career. And that may be an erroneous perception, but it is a perception. And so I had fears about coming back, getting a job, what would people think, but I really needed to take that time for my own creativity, my own growth, absolutely.
Okay. I often wonder, I'm sure people at various stages, especially women, they would want to take a sabbatical off. Is there any particular group who find it easier to do than not? Because there are a whole lot of things that are tied to a woman's responsibilities. Family, job. Like you mentioned, it's a convergence of a whole lot of factors. What would you tell a woman who's going through this phase? What would you tell? Is sabbatical necessary, or what is the other way to deal with a situation like this?
Yeah, I mean, a sabbatical is not necessary, and I tell people that all the time. I tell people that building resiliency is all about getting uncomfortable. And it's doing the things that you need to do to grow, but it's change and you're going to be uncomfortable. So that could be different for everybody. For someone, it might be going back to school. For someone else, it might be looking for a different job in a different industry. For someone else, it might be moving across the country for a job that really they have passion about. So it could be a variety of things. For me, the timing, just the stars aligned, and the timing worked out for me to do what I needed to do to grow, and it was uncomfortable initially,
Okay. So how do you build your resiliency on an ongoing basis? What are you doing now?
Absolutely. I am focused on, a big part is utilizing my strengths is a big one. And so writing this book, my passion about women, I really am honing in on my strengths. And you know how that feels when you're able to do that. That's just incredible feeling. I'm doing a lot of networking, really building out my network. I've moved to a new city, so I'm meeting a lot of people there, which helps build my resiliency. And I'm meeting a lot of people who are passionate about this same topic, which is very exciting for me as well.
That's great. So I know we are going to show our viewers some of the strategies and some of a brief summary of the entire book. And before we get into that, I just wanted to check, how did you determine the 6 strategies? Tell us a little about the book. Tell us a little about the foundation of the book.
Yeah, the 6 strategies were determined through research that my co-author Kevin Norse and I both did. And it even started before we connected and decided to do the book. My dissertation was on women in career derailment. So there was a lot of research I did that's related to this topic through that. Kevin's dissertation, and we went to the same university about the same time, his was on resiliency and managers who went through Hurricane Katrina and stayed resilient. So a few years after that, actually it was about 5 years or so after that, we started talking and said, well, how can we combine our passions? And his passion, he also does a lot of work with women's associations. And so we decided to do this book. So on top of our dissertation research, we interviewed over 100 coaches and women leaders, and the people we interviewed were people who did have these challenging experiences and thrived based upon our definition. And so we interviewed them, got their stories, and then looked through it to see what were the key themes that enabled these women to thrive. And then we went through that, got the 6 strategies, and then we did a lot of validation. We sent the survey out through the International Coach Federation to their membership, thousands of members, and got input there on the 6 strategies. And when I was on my sabbatical, I continued to meet talk with women globally, because we wanted the book to have a global focus, not just a U.S. focus. So I validated the strategies globally as well.
I think one of my most interesting bits about the book was reading those individual stories and how those women thrive. And the funny thing was, I don't know if it was funny, but I think the interesting bit is you get a peek of yourself in each of those.
Yes.
And it helped to see how they came out of it. So I think the stories were rich and extremely helpful. I think we can move on to giving a little summary. Over to you, Lynn.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's some key concepts in the book that are important to get a foundation for. One is career derailment, and I've talked a little about that, but that's really on the far end of the spectrum when you think about career challenges. That's probably one of the most difficult challenges a woman may encounter, and that's, as I said, getting forced out, fired, asked to resign. And so it's important to understand that, because building resiliency, if you do it proactively, will help you in that situation overcome it and thrive, or you could do it reactively as well. And that gets to the concept of using the strategies proactively or reactively. We recommend proactively, but they can certainly be used when you're in the middle of a situation and you realize, oh, I have this challenge and I need to address it. If you're building your resiliency proactively, though, you're going to be much stronger when the challenge hits. And that gets to large and small challenges, another concept, in that these strategies can be used for those very large, significant challenges to help you overcome those and thrive. And also they can be used for the smaller day-to-day challenges that we encounter, conflict with a coworker, difficulties with a vendor, different things like that. The other key thing about resiliency is all about overcoming adversity. And we're focusing on helping women thrive, not just maintain or survive, but actually thrive in that adversity. So that requires a growth mindset. It's an intentional choice to grow from the challenge versus simply maintain or sometimes decline from the challenge. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought about the whole, I had a little question about resiliency, especially more in terms of clarifying the definition. I was reading the definition in the book, and it almost seemed almost related to the word agility. I think almost it's literally a buzzword right now.
Yes,
everybody is talking
is.
about you need to be agile, you need to be the whole concept of learning agility. I know Conferry is doing a lot of work, but even in our research, one thing that we find, whether you're a leader or a human capital executive, something that we want people to be, especially from a future perspective, is to be more agile. And the whole definition talks about learning from your experience, but at the same time looking at it, strategic thinking, doing some strategizing. And can you draw a distinction? Is there a particular reason why you chose the word resilient? And just help clarify the two concepts.
Yeah. Resiliency is all about overcoming adversity and difficulties and challenges. It's all about being strong enough to do that. Agility is really about flexibility. And being able to, typically in our world, the term is used with learning agility.
Learning agility, right.
Yeah. And what you're looking at, especially with high potentials, is that they are then able to learn something quickly and apply it quickly and appropriately to their job to impact positively the business. And so it doesn't necessarily mean anything is difficult or adverse or challenge. It just means they're able to learn more quickly than others and apply it more quickly in an effective way to positively impact the business, whereas resiliency is really all about overcoming adversity or challenges and being strong to do that.
So would your, to clarify, would it mean that the speed with which you're able to apply a lot of this resilient strategy, that could be, you need to be agile. You
Yes.
need to have a learning agility. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I really needed that clarification actually.
Sure.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So this really gets to shows how we in the book want to focus on helping women thrive from adversity, not simply survive or decline. And so when a challenge happens, often what we may do, especially if it's a significant challenge, is decline initially. And that's just natural. But the key is how long do you stay there? And how long do you stay kind of in the negative frame? And the key is to get out of it quickly. Now, you may get out of it, but you may simply survive. And that means maintaining, going back to the old way of doing things. Nothing's really changed. And what we're wanting is to really help people thrive and grow from challenges, because there's so much to be learned. And as I said, resiliency and thriving is really about getting uncomfortable. But then how do you grow and learn from that and thrive? Using my case as an example, I could have just took another job right away, and that would have been surviving. What I did is I did something, made myself uncomfortable, but grew and learned from it. That's thriving.
I see. Okay.
And so what I'd like the audience to do now is take a self-assessment for resiliency. I'm going to ask you 6 yes or no questions. Simply respond yes or no. This will start to give you a sense of which of the resiliency strategies you're already strong in and which you might want to work on or would want to work on and begin working on after this webcast. So the first question is, do I have the breadth and depth I need in my network to get support during challenging times at work? The key is breadth and depth. Breadth means you've got a large professional network. Outside of work, typically, is what we would recommend, because sometimes, especially if there's a layoff, some of those contacts may go away. So do you have a large network outside, breadth? And depth is, do you have a close group of people, and this could be family and friends, doesn't have to be a large number, that you can reach out to when times get difficult to really share truly what's going on. So yes or no, do you have both breadth and depth in your network? Second question is, am I clear on my values, passions, vision, and goals for my career? When is the last time you took a look at what your values are and what's important to you in regards to your career? Often we'll get into a job, we'll get heads down, and maybe we knew initially, but things can change for us and for the organization. And so it's important to be clear on your values. What are your top 5 values? What are your passions? What are your goals? So yes or no, are you clear on those? Question 3, am I getting the development I need to grow and be successful at the work I do? So that gets to, are you developing? Are you taking charge of developing yourself? Are you getting feedback on what your strengths and development needs are? And do you have a plan to work on those? Yes or no? 4, am I able to focus on taking care of myself, including my physical, emotional, and spiritual needs? And it's all 3 of those. So this makes this a fairly significant category or question. Physical is sleep, diet, and exercise. Emotional is really, are you aware of your triggers, your emotional state, and how you deal with that? And spiritual is however you define it. Spiritual can be yoga, meditation, mindfulness. It can be religion. It can be whatever for you gets you away from the day-to-day and all the noise and allows you to think about other things and be open. Yes or no? Are you working and are you strong in all 3 of those? 5, do I fully use my strengths in my job to achieve the career I want? And we talked about that a little bit earlier, how important it is and how happy and how successful and how motivated we are when we're using our strengths in our work. So are you able to do that? Yes or no? And the last one is, am I able to maximize the positive aspects of a challenge and not dwell on the negative? And as we talked about, often when something really significant happens, we may go negative immediately. That's natural, but how long do you stay there? Are you able to flip it? Are you able to grow from it? So number 6 is yes or no. So keep those in mind as we go to the strategies, because these align with the strategies, and keep in mind which ones you answered yes to, which means you're probably working on those, strong enough in those. But if you answered no, that's probably an area to focus on.
Actually, before we move on to the strategies, I took this assessment and the other assessments in the book, and I found myself thriving on some areas, surviving in some, and declining in some. But at the same time, I think what was important to see, it was important for me to see where I stand in those areas, because otherwise you're just going through the routine, you're just going through the mundane activities. But it helped me clarify which areas. It was important for me to see where I am, because then I think it becomes easier to strategize and move ahead. So I think from that perspective, this was extremely helpful exercise. So thank you. We can move on.
Okay, that's great to hear. So here's the framework, the 6 strategies, and as you can see, it aligns with each question. And so strengthen support networks, clarify purpose, build self-awareness, enhance self-care, actualize strengths, and broaden coping skills. And strengthen support networks is the one that got to the breadth and depth of your network. Both are very important to have that, to build that towards your resiliency, because it's, my co-author equates it to the net when you're doing trapeze. You're a trapeze artist, and the net at the bottom that'll catch you. It's your network that catches you when challenges happen. It's your network that will support you. Your professional network, the breadth, in a way that will enable you to learn more about the profession or a profession you might want to go into, what's happening out there, and awareness of the jobs available and other things. And it's the depth that gets you that support you really need and the people to talk to share really what's happening and what's going on with you. So that's critical for your resiliency.
I think it's so important because one of the things that whenever adversity hits you, the first thing is you isolate yourself from everybody. I think that seems to be a common, and it was good to see even it mentioned in the book. But I wanted to find out from your research, did you find sections, was this a global study, was it just US based?
It was global.
It was global based. So did you find that were there regional differences in terms of how comfortable women were in networking with other people? Because I'm guessing from the Asian culture from where I come, I think it does not come very naturally. Supporting network is not something that we do every day.
Yeah.
And what would be your advice for such a, I mean, it's not only from the cultural aspect, it's also whether you're an introvert or an extroversion. The whole personality element also works into this. What would be your advice to women who find networking difficult?
Yeah, and I talk about this all the time because it is the introvert extrovert difference as well. And what I always say is, make it intentional. Be very intentional about your networking. It's not simply going to a conference I was at last week and not having a purpose or a plan and just figuring how many people can I say hi to, because that can be overwhelming.
That's a lot of the articles now.
That can be
Find 5 people.
Yeah, that can be so overwhelming.
Right.
But it gets back to the next strategy we're talking about is clarify your purpose. If you know what your purpose is, get very intentional about your networking. Who are the right people to connect with in regards to your purpose and your vision and your mission that you have for your work? So be very intentional. Have specific questions prepared. Know what you want to say. Know who you want to talk to. And that can be very helpful. Have a plan. That helps introverts a lot to have that plan.
Okay.
The next one then is clarify purpose.
Right.
And that gets to, as I said, really having a sense of your values, passions, vision, mission, and goals for your job, which oftentimes we have maybe going into a job, or we may have it at the beginning of our career, but we'll get heads down, we'll get rolling in a particular job, and we may not realize that we've changed, or the organization has changed, or things aren't aligned. But what I like to say is sometimes you'll get this little noise, or this little noise, I guess is the best way to describe it, in your head that something's not quite right. Yeah. I'm not feeling quite right. Like my phone call and my nauseousness, that was big noise. Right. But so the key is you want to do this on a regular basis to proactively be resilient, because if you know where you're going, that's going to make you resilient, because and if you have a plan to get there, that's what's going to make you resilient. And maybe you're very happy in the role you're in, and when you do this analysis and you clarify your purpose, you say, this is spot on for me. I just want to get stronger. I want to be the best I can be in this current role. But just to have that clarity is so important, because then you're going to be strong and resilient, because you know you're either doing what you want to do or you have a plan to get you there.
But I think I think the struggle most women find, or anybody finds really, is the lack of clarity of even knowing that you don't have a vision. I mean, every day becomes literally a routine. Yes. And hence, I mean, I know you touched upon this, but if you can talk a little more about how can we reconnect to our values and to the mission?
There's variety of activities that you can do to determine your values. I recommend, and we have one in the book, but there's probably ones you can Google as well, a list of values. Start with that, 20, 40, however many happen to be on the list. It's things like family, service, health, growth, learning, whatever it may be. You'll find a list of those, and then take some time and think about your top 5 experiences that you've had at work where you really felt the most positive, that you were excelling, you were happy, you were thrilled with what you were doing. Jot down a few notes about those. And then what'll pop out at you is your values will start to pop out. They will surface. If you look at the description, it might be something about, well, I worked on this, I was a lead on this project. We were able to accomplish really great business results, and at the same time, it allowed me to be home with my family in the evenings. Well, right there surfaces your maybe a value is results, orientation, and family. So write those down and then analyze them and see what, look at the list of values, but you can always add different ones. And what are your top 5?
But that also brings me to another point of the importance of journaling and writing your goals. And I know you mentioned in your book a study by Gail Matthews. Can you talk about it a little? Because I think many times, time being one of the excuses, people think about, okay, this is what I want to achieve by the end of the year. Everything is in your mind. But in the book and the Gail Matthews study, they specify the need to write down your goals. Can you just talk about that study and why you insist on people journaling and writing?
Yeah, and it's even more than writing them down. Right. So if you just come up with your goals, you may achieve them. If you write them down, you're going to have a greater chance of achieving them. It even gets your chances of it actually making them happen get much stronger when you share your goals with someone else, and they actually get even much stronger if you continually revisit with that person you shared them with initially on how you're doing and where you are in the process. If you have that, almost a peer coach relationship.
Almost a partnership.
Right? Yes, partnership. Okay. Yep, exactly. Okay. So the next one then is build self-awareness, and this one really is being aware of your own emotions and development needs, so that they don't get in the way of you being resilient. So what are your triggers? What gets in the way for you emotionally? And how can you consciously and proactively manage those? And the other is in the development needs. Have you gotten feedback? And do you ask people for feedback? And do you make change when you get that feedback as appropriate? And so that's really key. That builds resiliency because you're not being your own worst enemy then.
Right.
You're not doing things that get in your own way. And so that's a key to resiliency.
Okay. Do you want to move on to the next?
Sure. And enhanced self-care is, as I mentioned, it's the three: spiritual, emotional, and physical. So you need to be all three of those, and that's key. Actualized strengths is all about knowing your strengths and maximizing those.
Do you find that point number 3, self-awareness, the physical, emotional, spiritual, and playing on your strength, they almost seem related? Because if you are not aware of your strengths, or if you don't know what are the areas that need to be worked on, I don't think you're going to be working on any of these areas. What do you think?
The strengths could be something different.
Okay.
So what I believe and what a lot of research shows is you've got to be, if you look at those three, physical, emotional, and spiritual, physical really does come first often, because if you're not eating well, if you're not exercising, if you're not strong and feeling well, then that can really impact your emotions, and definitely you may not be spending time on the spiritual at all because you're in such a rush to get things done and get to your actions and your activities. But as far as strengths, those could be something different. So your strength could be writing. Writing a book could be a strength, or research could be a strength. So they would certainly impact your ability, I think, to be strong in those. Definitely. Yeah.
So I know if you have to tell somebody you need to start working on your physical, emotional, and spiritual, and it can be a lot, asking somebody to start on those.
Yeah.
So would that be the order? Work on your physical, then get onto your emotional, and then the spiritual? Is that the order you would recommend?
Actually, we recommend more that you start small in each area.
Okay.
So instead of taking on one in a big way, do a couple things. Let's say you feel your diet's good and your sleep is good, but you're not exercising. Well, take on something small in exercising, but take on something small and spiritual as well. Maybe you start meditating, or you get an app to help with some meditation. And so what we recommend is you do something small in all three categories if you need to move forward in all three.
Okay. Okay. And there is one more strategy?
Yes, broaden coping skills is all about the growth aspect. And it's really reframing challenges so that you can grow and learn from them. It's almost the glass half empty versus the glass half full. And how long does the negative aspects hold you back and get in your way? And how are you able to, and this is where often journaling comes in as well. Are you journaling, writing down, recording how you're reacting to things, how you're responding, and what's your plan to really reframe it and do it differently, and how are you going to grow from a situation?
Would you be able to focus a little more on other coping recommendations that you probably would have?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to coping, there are a variety of recommendations. You'll see a lot of these strategies kind of you can work on one and impact another. So part of coping can also be having someone that you can actually talk with to share your issues, what's happening, someone who will hold you accountable, who will ask you the right questions, someone who may be seeing things differently and observing your behavior differently. So that can help as well for that. I mentioned the journaling can also help definitely with that. And creating a plan. I like to talk about how you can create a plan to see where you are on your coping skills and look at it. You might want to look at it weekly. How did I do this week as far as how I responded to challenges and difficulties? Did I allow them to draw me in, or was I able to be strong and respond as I would like to? So you can almost track that on a scale and see how you come out.
I mean, interesting that you mentioned that having somebody to be almost like accountable for. But we just came out with a report, a global executive coaching, and your coach can be,
Yes.
I know a lot of the organizations are employing coaches, executive coaches, to be that sounding board. So it plays right into what we are actually
Absolutely.
finding in our research too.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are great strategies, but I think when you start on, and I'm trying to build in, I've had this adversity and I'm trying to build on.
Yes.
Would you recommend, is there one strategy that you should start with? Because I think beginning with all of them is going to be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
So is there any one step that you would recommend that should be your starting point, and what are the other steps?
Yeah. So what I do recommend is the assessment. Either the simple six question like we did here, or the one in the book is more in depth. And the strategies aren't linear and are sequential, so we're not saying that it's 1, 2, 3 in any particular order. There's some that typically when you do the self-assessment, you'll find out you're doing well, and there's some you probably aren't focused on. That's where you want to start, and it's different for everybody. And so you may find out there's a couple that you're declining in, or maybe surviving in, that you need to work on. And so then from there you use the activities and actions to put a plan in place.
Based on from your examples in the book, can you give us with an example how this would go about? Like you mentioned in the example with the thriving example of Maria or Yolanda, or I forget the name of the other lady. But based on one of those examples, can you take one example and say, this was the adversity and this is probably how we could have moved in?
Yeah, absolutely. So an example could be, I'm going to use an example, this is a made-up example of a person, Maria.
Sure.
And what happened with Maria is that there was a reorganization in her company, which happens to all of us, right? Frequently, sometimes. And she was placed in a new job with a new manager. And she wasn't happy in the new job. It actually changed her work and shifted her work. And for whatever reason, that could be tied to it, she wasn't getting along well with her new manager. So she stopped and did some assessment of what's happening here. And a couple things popped up for her. One, because she was feeling concerned about her job, she decided she needed to further build her network. So she was going to work on that strategy of strengthening her support networks. And she had the depth, so she decided she needed to focus on the breadth, because she was thinking, I may not want to stay in this job, but I've been heads down. I really don't have a network to really learn about what's going on in the industry or profession that's important to me, and so I need to build that network. And so what she looked at doing is getting a mentor who could mentor her on her particular interest and profession, and she also joined a couple of professional organizations to build that. The second thing she worked on was clarifying her purpose. And that came down to, she had been in her job for a while, all was going well, and all of a sudden it shifted, and she really wasn't sure exactly maybe what she wanted to do anymore. She was happy in her previous job, all she knew she wasn't now. So she actually took some time to look at her values, look at her passions, and put a vision and mission into place. And when she did that, she realized the job she was currently in was not the job she wanted. She liked the company, so maybe it would mean for her changing jobs in the company, or it might mean an external movement. And so she started to do some networking to see, and learning more about available positions in her company and outside to see what next move she should make.
Okay. Given your career as an HR executive and business leader, what do you want women to know about the work environment and about the whole topic of resiliency?
Yeah, I think an important thing is that is the only way we can support each other is to realize and acknowledge that issues do exist for women, and there's societal, organizational, other people, and ways that we impact ourselves. So change change like this doesn't happen as a evolution, it happens as a revolution, and I think that's what's starting to happen now. Just like every 20 or 30 years something comes to the forefront, and I believe I see that happening. So I think an important thing is for women to realize, to learn, to look and read and see what's going on out there and how they can help and support other women and also their organizations. I think the other thing is the importance of resiliency to help you through challenges day to day, whether it's these bigger challenges or smaller challenges. How can you build your own resiliency and strength to help manage that? Because the other key thing is we get hit not just with one thing, but multiple things that impact our ability to be strong.
Okay. From an organizational perspective, what do you think some some of the things that organizations can do to help women build their resiliency.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tag another question to it. So recently I had a conversation with a friend, a male friend, and I think this is something that you mentioned in the book too, that we want to talk about equal rights, but at the same time we speak about special activities or special programs for women in organizations. How would you respond to this friend of mine? And he was like, you'll talk about equality, but at the same time you'll talk about having special programs, needing special privileges. How would you respond to this friend?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see it as special programs or privileges. There are differences and there are policies and practices that impact women and people of color as well. So when I talk about the things that organizations should do, often I'm not saying they need to look specifically just at women. They probably need to look broadly to make sure that policies and practices are equitable for all. When you talk about women's resource groups,
right.
Most organizations, if they have a women's resource group, they also provide the ability for other types of resource groups. So once again, equality. But it does make a difference to be able to get together. There are different issues for women. There are different issues for women of color. There are different issues for different ethnicities. And so it is helpful to get together and talk with people who are having the similar kind of issues. But it's also good for those same groups to hear from people outside. So for the women's groups, it's great for men to come and speak on different topics, for men to come to the meetings. And so I know a lot of the women's organizations or resource groups I know of, they have open attendance. It's not restricted attendance. It is open to both men and women. So that's what I would say, is that it's not, we're not asking for special privileges for women, or we're saying it needs to be equitable across all, but women do have different issues, as well as other different groups, diverse groups, and so those need to be addressed.
So it almost goes back to the saying that equality does not necessarily mean one size fits all.
Yes.
But would you be able to give, from your research, do you have an example of an organization who's doing something phenomenal in terms of helping women develop their resiliency? Or is this an area that really organizations have not really tapped into?
Organizations are at different ends of the spectrum, absolutely. Catalyst has some great studies on and does an annual award on groups, companies who have done excellent things in the area of diversity. What they have found is things like hiring practices, making sure that you've got diverse teams. And I say project teams as well as leadership teams as well as boards. What that shows, it's not just a nice thing to do. There's business reasons to do this. Research has shown that businesses, organizations with diverse boards, leadership teams, project teams have better results. And so I think it's really key. It should be a business driver. That's been proven. But for whatever reason, and the reason for whatever reason, it's a deeply ingrained societal issues as to why it doesn't happen, and why it doesn't happen quickly, and why it's taken so long and it's moving so slow.
We came out with a research at the beginning of the year where we found out that organizations that were heavily engrossed or probably invested in activities or programs for related to diversity, women issues, they literally drew a close correlation between organizations that were inclusive and innovation. And I think this ties in back with whatever you say. But also coming back to your cultural question that you asked, based on since it was a global study, did you find any particular age group or women of a particular culture or region, did you find them to more resilient than the other? Any interesting finding that you can talk about, highlight? Yeah,
actually I wouldn't say I found one group more resilient than the other. I think in validating the strategies across the world with a variety of women, there were kind of two questions I had for them. I wanted to learn what their culture was like and how it was different as compared to others, and then their workplace culture, and then I asked them, would these strategies work even though it's different maybe in some ways. Would these strategies work? So yes, I found differences in cultures around the world as far as the workplace, as far as, you know, the United States is farther ahead than some as far as women and equality, and behind in some, you know, as compared to some. But the strategies in the discussions I had, women said they would work. Regardless. But I think a key thing I did find consistently that I think is an interesting finding is there's research on what I would call denial that the issue exists. And so you may talk to a woman, or a lot of women, I've heard this come up, where they say, well, I don't see any issues in the workplace
and
around this.
Irrespective of
Yes.
irrespective across the board.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's not, you know, and the reason being often is, who wants to get up in the morning, every morning, and come to work thinking, well, I'm only going to get so far because there's these societal, organizational, and all these issues going on. So it's almost better, I mean, not better from my perspective, but what women often want to do or may do is not recognize the issues exist. And so that might be what happens sometimes when I've had the comment made to me, well, I talked to so-and-so and she just doesn't feel there's any issues at all. And so I think that's where it gets back to my comment, how important it is that we read, we learn, and we see what the issues are, because the only way we're going to make change is to work together to make that change.
Interesting. And you mentioned a lot of things today, and in terms of takeaway. I have to highlight one of the takeaways from there are a lot of takeaways. One, it identified where I needed to work on, the areas thriving, surviving, and declining. But I think one of the quotes that I found in the book that actually resonated with me at this point is a quote by Maria Rilke. A quote, and the quote is, "Live the questions now, perhaps then, someday in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer." I think that gave me a completely new perspective at this point. But you spoke about a whole lot of things, a kind of a summary. What are 2 or 3 things that you would want our members and the viewers to take away from this webcast?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is that thriving is an intentional choice. And that you've got to make that choice to do that. Lucky is not a word in my vocabulary. You're not lucky because something happens. You've made the intentional choice, you've gotten uncomfortable, and you've made it happen. And so I think that's key. I think the other key is that the 6 strategies are well researched and will help you be resilient and thrive. But you may be uncomfortable, like the networking. Introvert, extrovert makes you uncomfortable, but it
is a real problem.
It's what's going to help you thrive, and that you can use those proactively or reactively. Yeah.
Okay. And anything else that you would probably want from your book specifically? Anything else that you would want the members to take away?
No, I think it's key to realize that while this is a women's, we call it a women's issue. It's everyone's issue, and that there are so many things that organization and organizational leaders can do to pave the way and help women build their resiliency.
At some point, you've also mentioned that this book is even helpful for men.
Yes.
Not only from the perspective of knowing what the strategies are, but how men can help women go through this entire process. Can you talk a little about that?
Absolutely. So the book contains 6 personal stories from women, and then each of the strategies is a compilation story. We had several men read the book as beta readers, and then also to provide endorsements, and their comments were, well, I learned a lot, and it really helped me better understand the challenges that women are up against. I've also presented the strategies to men, mixed groups where men attended, or recently a group that was almost all men, did a little bit of changing up, but many of them saw applicability of the strategies. The difference being, and why it's focused primarily on women, is it presents a problem-solving method for women. Oftentimes we may get more caught up in the emotion and more self-blame. And so one of the purposes of the book and focus on women is to present a problem-solving method so women can step back and really look at it and what's happening and all the issues across the board and how they can be resilient. And so it is specific to women for those particular reasons, and the fact that women are up against other challenges in addition to those that men encounter.
I like the fact that the book did not pit men and women against each other, but it was about literally this is a growing partnership. It is an entire joint work, and it draws the support of organizations, men, into your journey. And that was a great approach, I thought. I've asked you this question: if you could write another book, what would it be?
Yeah, and my passion is around women. All my books to date have been nonfiction, but I feel like a sweet spot for me, a next step is I'd love to write a fiction book.
Okay.
But I think a good way for me to make that transition is to find a woman in history who's been very strong, had a very interesting life, maybe demonstrated a lot of resiliency.
A biography?
Not a biography, because that requires you to stick to the facts, only the facts. I'd like to do a historical fiction where I'm all about giving women voice, and so that way I could give her a voice, and I wouldn't have to stick, exactly to all the facts.
So, any strong contenders that are coming up in terms of women in history?
I'd love to get some names from folks. I have friends who text me names periodically, and so I would love to get some suggestions, because I think that's definitely my next step.
Yeah. So, whenever you decide to write that book, or whenever you're done with that book, let us know and come back and visit us.
Absolutely. I've really enjoyed this.
This has been great. And how can people get hold of you, or if they want to have any questions about the book, what can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I have an author page on Facebook, which I publish multiple articles on this topic. Also, the book has a website, www.shiftintotthrive.com. You can go there, and my email address is here as well, Lynn Schmidt, lschmidt912@hotmail.com. So there's a variety of ways to connect.
And for avid tweeters, I know in an earlier slide you also talked about, you gave your Twitter handle.
Yes.
Are you active on Twitter?
I am, absolutely. So hopefully folks are tweeting now as we speak. It's at LM_Schmidt.
Okay.
And also, folks, if they want to go to shiftintotthrive.com, and plug in their email address, we'll keep them updated on information about the book and send an online resource guide.
Okay. Well, Lynn, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us in the studio. For the members, go and get this book. This has been it's not just a book. You can't finish it in a single read. It almost works like a workbook. It has 6 incredible stories of women that you can literally pick out from your book and read them separately, and they're so insightful. I also like the fact that you mention a lot of website support, or even apps that viewers can leverage from anybody who decides to embark on this journey. So go and get this book. It's a great book, and I'm pretty sure that you will not be able to go through it by a single read. It needs to be done on a methodical basis, chapter by chapter. And last but not the least, about the conference board, our next month's book discussion webcast is Career Control, Love the Job You're In or the One You Want. Almost a perfect segue from this topic. And it's going to be moderated by our VP of HR, Russell Morris. And there you go. And if you need anything about human capital, log into our Human Capital Exchange. It is literally a one-stop shop for everything related to human capital, talent management. So anything related to succession management, executive coaching, our reports, webcasts, our exchange. It's almost like a discussion board. So if you have any question, please pose your questions there, and our research team will be more than happy to help answer. With that, Lynn, thank you again for joining. This has been an incredible book, and wish you luck on your next book.
Thank you.
Come back again when that book is done. And with the conference board, this is Sherlyn Nair saying have a good day and stay resilient.